If you are a Christian concerned with climate change, my beautiful people, you are allowed to be. You are no less of a Christian, and you are not alone. Hi beautiful people! Today we're going to talk about something I've been wanting to address for a long time, and that is Christianity versus climate change. I've been putting this off because it's such a huge beast to tackle, but with the recent walkout, the emergence of 16-year-old activist Greta Thunberg, not to mention the threats of an impending apocalypse, it is time to talk about climate change. First of all, I have to admit that I've been so confused as to why Christians in particular doubt climate change. I couldn't understand the correlation, the motivation, or the reason behind this, but I have long heard the rhetoric. I have heard my fellow Christians make the following 5 arguments. 1, that to uphold the importance of trees, soil, animals, anything on earth outside of God himself is to be an earth worshiper instead of a God worshiper. 2, that in Genesis 1:26, God gives us dominion over everything on earth. Therefore, it's within our right to do with earth's resources whatever we please. Number 3, that scientists cannot be trusted. That scientists are actually being paid off by liberals, big businesses, etc. to get votes and make money through this scare tactic of climate change. Number 4, that the apocalypse is the return of Christ, so we should actually welcome and be excited about the end of the world. And finally, number 5, that to believe climate change is being either caused or solved by mankind is to imply we are more powerful than God. This argument is perfectly displayed in this Facebook comment. This Christian mother is relaying an interaction between herself and her daughter, Memory. I showed this to Memory without prompting her at all. As she watched, she shared commentaries saying how similar Greta was to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Her final response has me cracking up so hard. She told me, "I think God is laughing while saying, I told you that you would never see the end of the world coming. Touché. God is greater than us, and he created this earth. Therefore, there is no way little us could completely ruin it. That would indicate we have more power than God." If I'm missing any arguments, please comment below and let me know. But these are the standard ones I've heard from Christians. So let's break these down one by one to help you understand where these ideas came from and how we may have been duped as Christians into believing a big fat lie. To start, let's address number 5, this interaction between Memory and her Christian mama. First of all, I don't believe this anti-climate change idea is coming straight from the mouth of an innocent babe. Children learn from their parents, even when we're not intentionally teaching them. Just because the mother didn't prompt this particular response doesn't mean she hasn't indoctrinated her into beliefs that would elicit this response later. As a matter of fact, when it comes to the next generation, the children, teens, and young adults who would be most affected by climate change, when they're exposed to the science, they begin to rebel and lead movements that contradict the ideals of their parents on this issue. For example, Young Evangelicals for Climate Change are ushering Christians into this movement. Their mission statement reads, "For the sake of, quote, the least of these, we commit ourselves to living as good stewards of creation, advocating on behalf of the poor and marginalized, supporting our faith and political leaders when they stand up for climate action, and mobilizing our generation to join in." And Christians who believe in climate change are often put at odds with their parents and their community. Wheaton College student and Yucca advocate Chelsea Guys says, "I'm not encountering anyone at Wheaton, even among my most conservative friends, who disagree with climate change. She's having some trouble with her father, though, who's troubled by her Yucca work, and associates Chelsea's transformation into a climate activist with a liberal agenda he finds suspect." She said, "For a man who has such well-reasoned opinions, I just feel like there's so much emotion for him that it's not about the science at all." And I'd love to hear from the God is Great community on this. I know perfectly intelligent, respectable older Christians who outright deny climate change and actually get really emotional about it. So let's break down this generation gap and see what we can do. Back to the original point, Memory's mom is teaching her daughter that, quote, "Little us, aka human beings, are not powerful enough to destroy or save the planet." This stems from the belief that if you are a good theologically conservative Christian, you're not going to accept human causes because that would be denying that God is in control. And I really don't know what to say on this. It is so obvious to me that human beings experience cause and effect every single single day. With our God-given free will, we have and do exercise a great deal of power. Would we say that because God is all-powerful, we do not have the ability to change our bodies? That no matter how abusive we are to ourselves with food or sloth or self-hatred, that God remains in control and our bodies are preserved no matter what? Would we say that because God is all-powerful, that we are not powerful enough to change the landscape, to erect skyscrapers, tear down mountains, burn down forests, because that would imply we have godlike power? Even the Bible itself, namely in the Old Testament, speaks to human beings' actions controlling the earth itself, bringing on great catastrophes, floods, fires, etc. I don't see any other example, either in real life or in the Bible, where the concept of little human beings being powerless holds up. Which brings me to point number 1, which is that to care about trees, animals, the soil, etc. is to be an earth worshipper. And number 2, that because Genesis 1:26 reads, "Then God said, let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds, over the cattle, over all the earth," that we were given permission by God to do whatever we dang please with those resources. These 2 points make almost the opposite argument, that we are not only powerful, but that we are made in God's image, and therefore have every right to dominate creation. I was raised to believe this, the idea of a dualistic creator. This, believe it or not, is the stickiest argument for some conservative Christians. God as the divine, an entity that is outside of all creation, that is holy and separate, versus God being represented within and around all of creation. This distinction sounds subtle, but it is huge for Christians. It is my belief that this teaching of a dualistic God is a source of so much pain here on earth. When we see our bodies as fleshly and sinful, separate from God, we can despise ourselves and wonder why He even loves us. When we see animals as lacking divinity or even a soul, we justify abusing them and capitalizing on their flesh with no regard for their inherent value. My greatest argument against a dualistic God is that the Bible itself represents God in all of creation. Beyond the many psalms that display God's beauty and power through creation and nature, Romans 1:20 reads, "For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see His invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature." Psalm 66:4, "Everything on earth will worship you. They will sing your praises, shouting your name in glorious songs." These 2 verses tell us that not only does creation reveal God's invisible qualities, but that all of the earth, creation itself, is capable of worshiping. When I was younger, I was told that animals have no souls, that they are less than because they are not in God's image. But have you ever looked a cow in the eye, or seen a gorilla in its natural habitat, or just encountered your dog or cat after a long day and just reveled in their love and joy? Can there truly be no divinity in that? Can they truly be void of God? When you walk through a forest or gaze at a waterfall, are you not reminded of God's power and goodness? To deny, abuse, and misuse creation is to profoundly disrespect our Creator. If God gifted us this beautiful creation, why would we choose to dominate and cause harm? And if you still don't believe in climate change, let's address number 3, that scientists are pawns of a liberal agenda. This point is the most complicated, so I will link some of my resources below, but as always, I encourage you guys to do this research on your own. But in short, climate change morphed from its rightful place as a non-partisan issue to a partisan one, meaning that politics themselves took over what should have been a neutral, factual, scientific discovery. Many experts trace this shift back to 2006, when Al Gore, a liberal Democrat, released his documentary An Inconvenient Truth. Because Gore was a polarizing political figure, this documentary likely brought partisan baggage to the issue of climate change. I've mentioned this before, but again, under the leadership of the Moral Majority, which was formed by Jerry Falwell and his associates in the 1980s, Americans began associating theological conservatism with political conservatism. I resent this shift. The Moral Majority has been using the pure faith of Christians to gain political power for decades. Many Christians are told by the Moral Majority, which is filtered down from Jerry Falwell Jr. all the way to your local pastor, that they must vote Republican to preserve religious rights, save the unborn, and not promote the quote gay agenda. But I am here to encourage you free thinkers, you Jesus-loving people, that you do not have to be a Republican or a Democrat to represent real Christianity. The more that we're duped into believing that crooked politicians have our best interests at heart when there's so much money to be made, so much corruption, the more likely we are to blindly follow a leader into the dark. Christians, we should continue voting and advocating for things that represent our morality. But if we tie ourselves to one party or one leader and consider them God's representatives or treat them as though they're above reproach, then we are not being awake and ready stewards of our faith. One of the many ways that the moral majority has used our faith against us is by convincing us that science is the enemy of God. This to me is asinine because, again, look at creation. God, if you believe in him, is the author of science. And I know embracing science can be tricky because the Bible itself is 2,000 years old. The authors of our sacred text, no matter how divinely inspired, were still working with limited human knowledge. Therefore, they occasionally misrepresent the earth itself. They blamed fires and catastrophes on God's wrath because they had no concept of scientific explanation. But just because science robs us of biblical literalism doesn't mean that science is our enemy. Instead of fearing that science will break down biblical texts, we should focus on the divinity of God that we see in new discoveries. Galaxies, travels to the bottom of the ocean, awakenings in green energy and ways to lower or remove our carbon imprint. This is God revealing himself to us further, just as Romans 1:20 says. So, what I'd really like to say is if you are a Christian concerned with climate change, my beautiful people, you are allowed to be. You are no less of a Christian, and you are not alone. Catherine Hayhoe is a climate change scientist married to a minister. The mission of her life is to welcome evangelicals to believe the truth, to understand science does not conflict with our faith. For some, including Young Evangelicals for Climate Change, Creation Care, and the Southern Baptist Declaration, Christianity and climate change activism don't oppose each other. They align. And for anyone who still doesn't believe, can't we say better safe than sorry? Can't we simply acknowledge that biblically, animals and oceans praise God just as we do, and therefore are worthy of not being abused and polluted? Shouldn't we honor creation on behalf of our Creator just because we can? And that's it. Please comment below. I would love to hear your experiences, some of the difficulty you've had clashing with people in your life, or how you're bringing the best of yourself to this conversation. How are you honoring creation and therefore honoring God? I love you guys. Please like, subscribe, share with your friends, donate to my Patreon or Venmo if you can. God bless.